Which variant of Kang does Prime Kang hate above all the rest? Kang the Conqueror is one of the most fearsome tyrants in the multiverse and has a vast career of conquest. Over the years, hundreds of timelines have fallen to Kang variants, and entire realities have waged war with these multiversal parasites. A Kang's greatest enemy, however, isn't any variant of the Avengers, the Fantastic Four, or the X-Men, but instead, the greatest threat to a Kang is another variant of himself. These wars can eradicate entire universes, and oftentimes leaves Earth in absolute shambles. So what is the greatest rivalry between two Kang variants, and which Kang in particular does Prime Kang hate more than any of the others? Well, today, my friends, let's discuss this. The source today comes from the Celestial Madonna saga, where Kang's greatest enemy and disdain is revealed. Let's briefly cover though a broad overview of the Celestial Madonna arc in order to understand the context under which this is occurring, and then get into Kang's role. The Celestial Madonna was the first Celestial to ever get pregnant rather than simply having a Celestial egg nest in the core of a populated world. The child was destined to be an entity simply known as the Star Child, and in the year 114 AD, the Celestial Madonna went into hiding in order to nourish herself ahead of her child's arrival. The Star Child was then born in the center of the sun, costing the Celestial Madonna her life, and in 1956, a time-traveling Leonardo da Vinci found the child and took him under his wing. Together, they returned to the immortal city where he was raised for several years by the Brotherhood of the Shield. This immortal city was home to some of the greatest minds in history, all of who had congregated together across time and space under the pursuit of everlasting life. This included not just Da Vinci, but Sir Isaac Newton, Michelangelo, and more. This child was destined to become one of the most powerful forces in the universe, and this was the center of Kang's plan. He wanted to travel back in time in order to become the Celestial Madonna's partner, and in the process, he would ensure that the Star Child was the heir to his conquests. From here, Kang could raise the most powerful sentient weapon in the universe, and use his own son to conquer whatever timeline and reality he chose. As Kang ripped the timeline apart looking for the Celestial Madonna, the Avengers turned to two variants of the Conqueror in order to stop this rampage. The two Kangs that the Avengers contacted was Rama Tut and Immortus. Immortus being one of the oldest Kang variants in the known multiverse. As the story went on, Kang learned that Immortus had once fought the Avengers himself many years ago, and eventually learned that this was an older version of himself. This variant, however, disgusted Kang. Known as the Master of Time, Immortus had become one of the more passive variants of the Conqueror, electing instead to study the time stream in order to understand how the multiverse operated. He had set aside his thirst for bloodshed and his desire to conquer in order to learn, and he had since become the Master of Limbo. He studied under the Timekeepers, who tutored him in particular ways, and taught him more about the fabric of space-time than he had ever learned during his time as Kang, becoming the most enlightened version of the Conqueror by far. With the aid of Phantoms of Limbo, he shepherded history onto his proper course rather than forcing it to conform to a timeline that he personally constructed and wanted. And to Kang, this variant was weak. He saw this older version of himself and was disgusted at the idea that he would one day turn into this weak, sniveling old man who no longer had the spark in his eye and the fire in his heart. To him, a true Kang does not conform to the whims of time as Immortus had, but instead, he bent time to his own will. Time is a force to be conquered and used as a weapon, not an entity to obey. And if this version of Kang no longer wanted to force time to obey him, then he was no longer a true Kang. At his core, Kang is a ruthless tyrant who wants to rule with an iron fist, and in most of his iterations, this takes the form of brute force. Kang uses armies to steamroll and decimate realities, destroying his enemies where they lie, but Immortus no longer conformed to this ideology. Immortus was a chessmaster who knows exactly how his past self would think, and he uses this to always stay ahead of his other variants. This makes Immortus so much more difficult for Kang to fight, simply because his regular tactics will not work, and Immortus is so much wiser than any other variants. In a sense, he is the kryptonite of the other variants. This is on perfect display throughout the remainder of the Celestial Madonna story. During the conflict, Immortus took himself and his two variants into Limbo, where he imprisoned Rama-Tut and confronted Kang. Kang seemingly imprisoned Immortus and used his time travel devices to assemble his own legion to face the Avengers, who he then pulled into Limbo following this. This, however, was one giant chess game being played by Immortus, who hid the vision in Kang's legion as a plant who then turned on Kang and helped to assure victory for the Avengers. But the game was not over. Once the Avengers had identified Mantis as being the Celestial Madonna, Immortus offered to keep her safe and send a phantom in her place in order to draw Kang out into the open. After he believed he had won, the phantom revealed itself to be yet another trick from Immortus, which further enraged the Prime Kang. In the MCU, we see that Immortus is still alive and active within the Council of Kangs, and this seems to be one of their leaders, which leads us to wonder if he will have a much different characterization in the MCU's multiverse. In fact, the closest we've seen to a comic-accurate Immortus is He Who Remains, who governs time as a bureaucrat and a scientist rather than a warlord. This is the chessmaster that Immortus is seen to be in the comics, and the one that can always think one step ahead and enrage the other variants because of how predictable they are. He can run circles around Prime Kang and then make Prime Kang start chasing his own tail without anyone ever seeing the bigger picture. In the MCU, we don't know if we're going to have a variant like this ever again, seeing as He Who Remains is dead and Immortus is part of the Council of Kangs. But this doesn't mean that Immortus can't eventually grow out of this role, or that there's not another variant out there like Immortus. An iteration like this wouldn't be on the Council, but instead, he'd be off in his own corner of the multiverse, studying. Whether this is the Citadel, an adaptation of Limbo, or something else, one of the smartest and oldest variants of Kang may be out there learning. And more importantly, this might be one of the variants who can become the greatest ally to the Avengers in Kang Dynasty, if of course that ever happens. But anyway, my friends, what do you think of this rivalry between Immortus and Kang? Do you think there's a variant that Kang hates more than this? And if so, who? Do you think we'll ever get to see this iconic rivalry between the two play out on screen? And is this the key to stopping Kang? Thank you as always, my friends, so much giving us some of your time today. Hit that subscribe button to assemble and join our team for more superhero content, and have a great one.